This to me is like the really fascinating material.
We don't know what the answer is, but we're looking for patterns.
I think we're looking at kind of a type of cosmic alchemy.
The story slowly differs.
Still, a lot of people don't know that this technology actually exists.
The possibilities here are pretty
We
mind-boggling.
can't just believe that it was the work of these lone, troubled individuals.
Like a conspiracy theorist would look at that and say, well, the Illuminati or somebody planned this. Okay, we're back on Conspirinormal. This is going to be an odd, interesting night because I guess we're formally doing a fourth romper room because Rob has not yet recovered from his 2-week birthday party.
He'll do it to you.
So, yeah, it will. He's feeling bad. He's feeling sick, and Alyssa gave him a communicable disease. So,
Or I mean,
not the kind that you're thinking of, but just like a cold. So
we don't know because they might have detected Conspirinormal was getting recorded there, and they might have started bombarding him with microwave frequencies or something. So
yeah, okay, interesting you say that because I have an email that I want to read at some point. Someone sent us about something like that. So
juicy.
Yeah, but we were gonna have Peter Robbins on, and I rescheduled that one because Serfiel, your job just sucks.
Yeah, they prevented a Conspirinormal show.
Well, they didn't quite because here we are.
Yeah, but
And we have our good friend Heather on the line.
Hello, good friend Adam.
Good friend Heather, how's it going?
It's going pretty well.
It's been a while.
It's been a hot minute, as they say here in Tennessee.
Are you caught up with the show?
No, I'm up to, I just finished 215, which, by the way,
215.
thank you for having some more women on the show.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's the Loris Blue Raven, isn't it?
It is.
Okay. You got any thoughts on that since you've heard that show? We'd
about
love to
that.
hear your thoughts on that.
I definitely want to check out their drawing the spirits. That sounds pretty cool. As a concept.
Okay, that's Melissa and John. Okay, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That's the one I just finished listening to. I believe.
Solaris Blue Raven is a woman too, though.
Yeah, that's true. Did you hear that show? I think you might have.
That sounds familiar. Yeah, I believe I saw.
She's the one that said she was being mind controlled by Rush.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was listening to that one in like the dead of night while I was working on a book.
Mm-hmm.
I do book restoration, and so like I was down in the basement. It's dark. It's like 3 a.m, and I'm listening to this, and it's starting to wig me out a little bit, to be honest. But then I had to have like a little bit of a reality check, like Rush, really? But I think you kind of hit on it. Like it sounds like something that they must have made her think it was Rush. Like that's the only thing that makes sense to me. Like because she clearly believes this, and she seems pretty sane otherwise. So I kind of feel like this is a situation where she has been made to believe that she was being harassed by Rush.
Yeah, I really do buy her story. That's the thing about it.
Too.
I really do. I mean, there were people that I got a lot of response from that show, and people told us, and I'm still getting responses from that show.
It was engaging.
With
Yeah.
with respect, I don't buy it.
Okay, that's fine.
With
That's
respect
fine.
to her,
That's
I don't.
fine. But I would say, read Camilio,
I don't doubt.
and then
I don't doubt.
then revisit that interview and see how you.
I don't doubt half of the possibilities of the things she described existing, but I don't buy it.
Okay, yeah, but I don't think that it exactly was what she thinks it was.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problem. Is that they can make you think that it's a certain thing, and the fact that she may have some kind of mental issue also makes it even more ambiguous.
Right. You know what it reminds me of was you had a guest on once, I don't know, like 100 episodes or so back, where he was describing a scenario where these people were walking down a street in the middle of the night, and like at a garage or something, they both saw some figures doing something out in the street. But then as soon as they passed through the area, like it turns out that they saw the same thing, but like it was, see, now I'm just rambling. But like what it turned out to be was that like they saw an image of something that was totally different from what was actually there. Like it was an implanted image. And that's what it reminded me of immediately. And of course the Camelio stuff, which you had an interview with a guy talking about the Camelio stuff.
Robert Guthrie.
And that was another really, that really blew my hair back. That was just such a wild ride.
With the whole Rush thing, though, I could see how it's like implanting the absurd into something is a good cover, a good, I could see how that could be beneficial. So you implant like something that most people are going to be like, come on.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is like, are they trying to drive people crazy with this stuff? I think this is a good.
But also,
here.
what she was talking about isn't like some grand conspiracy. It's really what she's talking about was that the private sector people now are just doing things like that.
Yeah. It's gone from that very public, so-called public,
secret.
to the private sector, and that technology is there. So I think this is actually a good place for me to read this email.
Yeah, go for it.
Then, because I got an email just a few days ago, and I finally got to respond to it yesterday. But this person did tell me, I can read it. So this is interesting. I believe this is a woman. She says, "Dear Adam Sane, I've been enjoying your podcast for a few months. Your questions and comments are always interesting and, for me, educational. I don't agree with some of your guests, but the topics and conversations are intriguing nonetheless. I was catching up on a few podcasts when I came across the Solaris Blue Raven episode. I was dismissing her as an overexcited Rush groupie until she spoke of how her controllers had methods to control a person's physical actions and make them hear things. I was inclined to dismiss her claims too over the top, and her voice was a little manic sounding to me. But toward the end of the podcast, an odd memory came back. A memory of unusual events that happened to me in 2013. Apologies for the length of the account. I tried to edit, but some things could not be left out. First, let me premise by saying I am an artist, and for the last few years, I have been creating images related to the human brain and use MRIs and other science imagery for reference. Secondly, I am not a drug user. I've never taken psycho drugs or been treated for anything mental related. Coffee and wine were my worst vices. I am very careful about what I put into my body and had a complete physical a few months before the events. The doctor said I was in great health. At the same time, I don't take myself too seriously and think flexibility in thinking is always a good thing. I'm not inclined to be too suspicious. There are still a lot of good people in the world. If I had heard of mind control, I don't really think it could be a real. In the fall of 2013, I took part in an art event where you allow the public to wander in, view, and sometimes buy your work. Hundreds of people moved through my studio space, but I recall some interactions that sort of stuck out. 3 neuroscientists, a biogeneticist, 2 filmmakers, and 2 Google executives. Interesting conversation ensued, and they all took my information and a few bought work. Having these sort of people in an art studio is not in itself that weird, as the city had so many of them, and any art event attracted a percentage of this crowd. I have taken part in such events before, but the timing in relation to all the events might be significant. About 1 to 2 weeks after the viewing, I started having what I think were anxiety attacks. I would feel like I had to get out of my apartment and couldn't stand being there. Up until this time, my apartment had been very comfortable. I lived on the 3rd floor in the back of the building in a corner with a great view. Soon after the anxiety attacks, I started hearing a voice. The first time I heard the voice, it said something like, "You don't know what you are doing, stop trying to pretend." I remember thinking, what the hell was that? And also to myself, you've got to be kidding me. The voice I remember most was male, 30 to 40 years old perhaps, who sounded mildly amused, saying semi-sarcastic things like, "Why do you want to do that? You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to be sorry." All the comments were negative and seemed to be aimed at adding self-doubt to my thought process. After a few instances, I decided to blow it off as just echoes from the neighbors. Some part of it was a little comedic and likely just a weird fluke with my brain overworking. If my psyche was taking a weird turn, it was taking a doozy of a path. But a part of me was a little troubled by it because they seemed to be actually in my head in a way I can't explain. The audio was pristine, very clear and clean. If it were coming from my own mind, why was it male and its tone unfamiliar to me? If one hears voices from possible craziness, shouldn't the voice in your head actually sound like you? And the things said were not things that I was inclined to say to myself. All the comments seemed designed to tear one down, but instead it just pissed me off. After it happened a few times, I started to get sarcastic back and vocalize things like, "What are you supposed to be? You must not have much of a life to be spying on people. Junior, you need a new gig." I didn't take it seriously because it seemed to be the kind of thing that crazy people hear, and I knew I wasn't crazy. I did suspect that somehow, in some weird way, that someone was trying to mess with my mind, but why and how was that even possible? I dealt with it by focusing on my physical health, hiking, taking in the beauty of nature, and forcing myself to get more sleep and socialize more. I did not share the events with anyone. My friends were open-minded, but this was too weird. I worked my job, made my art, and kept going as before. I basically decided to shut it out. All this seemed to help, and the anxiety lessened, and the voices were all but gone. Maybe my refusal to pay attention made it less fun, but then another weird thing started happening. On occasion, my hands and arms seemed to move independently of my control. At first, it was at home and seemed a little amusing, but then not so much. I started to experience weird things out in public. Once in a restaurant, I watched my hand reach out and put a lot of very hot sauce on my food, making it inedible. Another time, I watched as my hand stretched out and put pepper in my friend's drink. Within seconds, I knocked it over with my other hand and was able to make an excuse to leave. These were things I would not conceive of doing, and they seemed very hurtful towards myself and others. Only once do I recall more than my hands and arms being involved. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down to drink it with a pastry. But instead, I abruptly stood up and started walking outside barefoot up to the roof. I managed to regain control of myself, but I was a little shaken. For a few moments, I felt like I had absolutely no control over anything my body was doing, and instead, I was being carried along. That event seemed to be the peak of the strange activity, and things calmed down mostly after that. One of the last times I heard voices, I found myself confronting the voice. Oddly, the voice was different and not as smooth in its delivery. Maybe that's why I took a chance to try a jab. The voice started again with its, "You're not very smart, are you?" Somehow I managed to remain calm, although I was angry, and said something to the effect that, "You people are really sad in your efforts to hurt and control people. You have no concept of humanity, and you've sold your souls for what? Ego, money, promotion? There will be a special place in hell for people such as you." The voice was silent, and I wondered if my punch landed in the area intended. I never heard it again. Altogether, the weird event seemed to last about 3 to 4 weeks. I did go back to the doctor's for another checkup, and she had some tests done which showed that somehow my chemistry had changed. My electrolytes were off, and she suggested supplements. I made no changes to my diet and was getting more sleep, so the chemistry shift made no sense. I was ready to dismiss this whole series of incidents, but for what happened at the end, a strange coincidence regarding the apartment. When I gave my notice to move, my neighbors told me they were sorry to see me go, that I was relieved from the previous resident. They said she was crazy and was always confrontational. The story I got from one neighbor was that she was a political activist and very involved in a number of protest groups leaning hard left. Another neighbor said she told him that the CIA were tracking her and trying to drive her crazy. She told him she was on some sort of list and they were making her life hell. It got so bad that she couldn't work and was evicted. Her neighbors chalked it up to drugs and general eccentric craziness. Her mail continued to land in my mailbox even after 4 years of returning to sender. One neighbor said they saw her at the front of the building looking for mail and handed some off to her. Oddly, I never crossed paths with her. After hearing about her story, I decided to look her up online. She had apparently tried to change all her personal information, name, residence, etc., a number of times. I didn't find much, but her handle popped up on a forum about government oppression and mind torture. She had engaged with others making the same claim. All this seemed too ridiculous to even consider, and soon I couldn't even give it any time to think about the possible ramifications. In another city, my mother was diagnosed with a terminal disease, and I made the decision to pack up and be with her. So after all this happened, I left the city and didn't think about it again until I heard the podcast. Listening to Solaris did make me consider, what if? Had someone trying to target the previous tenant somehow mistook me for her, or did the art event instigate the series of events as I crossed paths with the wrong someones? Or was it all just my imagination? This might seem odd to some, but I never thought of the whole situation as being anything paranormal. While I do believe there are paranormal possibilities of dimensions and beings we don't understand, I intuitively felt that this was not that. I had the distinctive feeling that someone was somehow tried to mess with my head using earthly gadgets to see if they could get certain reactions out of me. I could see how it might drive someone over an edge, especially if they were inclined to be depressed or mentally unstable. I think taking care of myself physically had helped to remain calm and not let it get the best of me, but whether it came from my own mind or somewhere else, I really have no idea why it happened or why it ended. I've not experienced anything like it since. After listening to the podcast, I felt the need to share this experience, but I am not interested in connecting to those claimed to be targets of dark government or corporate weapons. If it was a real project, I think it was a little too close, and I may have dodged being collateral damage. No point in testing the universe. Feel free to use my experience in the education of others if you wish. Sincerely, a listener. So.
Whoa.
Yeah.
About that.
Quite incredible.
It's pretty wild.
Very elaborate.
Yeah. Yeah. Very elaborate and very interesting.
Had you read?
Right.
I'm glad that she didn't
Right.
truncate
Yeah,
that
that's
ending.
the
I'm glad
whole
she didn't
email.
either.
And yeah, it was rather long, but I think it's interesting to go ahead and just read all of that. Because that's as interesting a story as anything that I've had any of the guests talk about.
As far as remote mind control possibilities.
Yeah. Or anything for that matter, really. that was pretty
What was the
incredible.
breakdown again of the group of individuals that she met?
Okay, I'd have to go back and look.
Two people from Google.
And she's not even sure that is who it was.
But when you get
I
around
would-
people like that,
I would kind of almost lean towards that there was something going on that was targeting the apartment. But she says 3 neuroscientists, a biogeneticist, 2 filmmakers, and 2 Google executives.
that's quite the motley crew.
Yeah. I'm going to assume that this is probably either Los Angeles or New York.
Where people like that hang out.
Yeah. And the amount that she said that there's a lot of art galleries in the city.
Now, if any neuroscientists, Google executives, or molecular biologists are Conspirinormal fans, we have no ill intention towards you.
Right.
Please don't get together with your friends and get the remote mind control on us.
Mm-hmm. So any thoughts on that, Heather?
Yeah, I like, and I kind of favor her interpretation that this was probably something to do with the previous tenant. Like, that really seems like to target 3 weeks. That's a lot of stuff to happen in like a 3-week time span. But as you were reading it, the wild thing is that, and I've mentioned on the show before when we spoke on the topic of mental illness, I do have an uncle with schizophrenia. And
Yes.
I mean, those are all the classic signs of schizophrenia. And, the voices, and no, they don't actually sound like your own internal monologue or your own voice. And they do actually have crystal clear sound. Like, it really does sound like there's a literal
Right.
another person in your head or more. And the whole like movement of your limbs that you're not controlling, all classic signs of schizophrenia. I don't know how that ties into like the electrolytes being out of whack, but at the same time, it really does seem to have a connection with the previous tenant who also displayed signs of,
Right.
mental illness. It's just a wild story, and she hasn't really had any problems since. So that seems to discount an actual chronic mental illness like schizophrenia, because I think it go away. I mean, you do have episodes of it, but it's not
So
like
then that opens up possibility
turkey,
for a
it's
lot of
gone,
different
done.
phenomenon that, you know, maybe it's some kind of weird poltergeist type of thing or haunting.
does.
Who knows?
Or it could be some kind of technology that mimics that.
Right.
Because that voice to skull technology, that definitely does exist.
Yeah.
And that could be all it is. But then what would explain the whole...
How much money do you think it takes to set up your own little system to do something
it's got to
like that?
be ridiculous.
It's got to be done in favors. I bet it has to do with like favors, not money.
What a bunch of losers then, man. I think like the real mind control that's making people money and power in the world is, you know, not through messing with people, you know, random people's heads and putting voices in their heads. There's real mind control of the masses going on through the same games that have been always played, you know?
And of course,
So
this also begs the question, like, then what of all these people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia before, who might actually have been targets of something like this instead?
that's a good way to get rid of people, is to make them crazy.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that you don't know. There's that fine line there. And it wouldn't be too hard with any of that technology to try to mimic the symptoms of schizophrenia.
Right.
Obviously, with this person that emailed, they were not going to buy it. They
Right.
weren't buying into it. There was resistance. There was a definite resistance there. So when that happens, obviously whoever was pulling this off must have just gotten bored. And at a certain point, she leaves that environment and everything stops. So it was something that was going on in that environment.
Right.
And the person that she had said was there before her in the apartment had apparently been into all these left-wing causes. So did that make her some kind of a target? Because that person is engaged in something that maybe the government or somebody finds to be unacceptable.
Well, we know that the government has targeted left-wing groups before. This is nothing new.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to even reach that far back in history, but the first thing that comes to mind is the Black Panthers. Where they systemically tried to make them seem like the bad guy, and they pushed it on media, and they turned cases around, and
It killed 27 people in it.
oh yeah, stormed into apartments and just murdered everybody in there. And I mean, this is nothing new, and we know that the government has engaged in false flag terrorism. And so like the idea that they would target someone who's posing a problem or digging too much or might know the wrong person at the wrong time, like totally believable.
Yeah.
Now, how they got caught up with this next lady who happened to live there, maybe they were testing to see if it would work on her too, or maybe they didn't get the memo that chick had left, or maybe they were just making sure that she had no connection to the previous tenant or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and as we stated before, it doesn't even have to necessarily be government. It could be private. It could be private industry.
Sure.
And private has, and that line now. So in this kind of stuff, I mean, that murky world in between the two, where government needs private to do things that they can't do, and private has the most to lose from people who want to regulate and stop them from making money doing whatever they want to do. So it's pretty weird.
So moving on from this subject, you had contacted me, Heather, not too long ago about something we said on the show. And you actually had something you wanted to take us to task about.
Well, so I'm a long-time listener since the beginning. And I think this was the first time I've ever had anything actually like a negative response to one of your shows. It was the article that you had read on the air. I think it was from Jezebel, or maybe it was Vice. It was some article you read on the air.
It was Vice. It was Vice. Yeah.
And it was talking about the school shooter who had shot up the school because he couldn't take no for an answer from a girl, allegedly.
Oh yeah. I remember that.
And the article in question that you had read was calling people to task about how that story was being worded and presented in the media, mostly in headlines, saying things like, boy shot up school because this girl rejected him, instead of placing the onus of responsibility on the actual shooter. It seemed to deflect it back to a girl for saying no. And the article was taking writers to task for that kind of representation. It really elaborated from there about the toxic masculinity culture that can arise and kind of affect the way we tell stories. And what I took issue with was actually when you'd finished the article, reading it out on the air, you turn to your co-hosts there and ask for their opinions. And what I actually took issue with was at the start of y'all's conversation about it, all of y'all seemed to kind of say that you didn't like the article, you didn't like the way it presented the ideas, that it was tearing down all men instead of just toxic masculinity, and also that it was saying that it's a larger problem than it really is, that it's really just we're all animals, and sometimes humans act more animal than human, and it's not necessarily a male problem. But then by the end of y'all's discussion, y'all had actually talked yourselves into actually agreeing with the article, and you all started saying exactly what the article had said, which y'all started out one way, saying, no, we disagree with the article. And by the time, like the end of the 5 minutes or however long you spent on it, by the end of the 5 minutes or however, y'all had kind of talked yourselves into just saying, yeah, we disagree with this article, but we're going to restate exactly what the article said. And that's how we feel about it, which kind of stuck in my craw a little bit. I got to be honest.
I'd have to go back and listen to that particular episode and see, because like that article, when I read it, I really did agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't sometimes with like I'm the one that reads the articles or finds the articles, and then I'll spring it on these guys.
Yeah.
So they won't. So they won't have like they won't be very well prepared.
Well, you noticed before I got on the air with you tonight. Before I got on the air with you tonight, I was like, "What are we talking about?" By the way.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And it was just such a minor grievance too. I don't want like people writing into the show being like that bitch. Well, what she got a problem with you guys. This is such a minor grievance. Really, I love you guys. I love the show. And y'all did point out by the end of the talk of on that topic, you said we're totally not advocating for men to go shooting up a school if they're rejected. And what y'all were actually talking about being against was toxic masculinity, but y'all just didn't call it that.
And I think we talked about these like weird subcultures that are growing and the implications of that, and it's like it's bad for everybody.
Yeah, it is.
And I think that's something that really needs to be explored, but I don't know if I really like touched on it like this, but I think we really got to psychologically explore the stuff that's going on. And I think a lot of the media hype, it's all offensive and terrible, but the media, it's a good story in the way they flip stuff into just being this demonization instead of like we have to understand what's going on, because this stuff is crazy. If people are making whole subcultures to murder people, and it's really strange things going on in society.
The incel stuff is really scary.
Yeah, it's terrifying, and we really have to address it and figure out what's going on. And I think one of my critiques, I don't really remember, but it was like the way that it's kind of exploited and the stories are exploited like bothers me, because I think we really got to get to the heart of this stuff. But I don't know. It's really weird. But I did feel like they were kind of playing clickbaity identity politics stuff. And I'm not like a right-wing red pill type dude at all. But I think it was really, my problem was like the media portrayal and the media like being just exploitative of these tragedies like this.
Vice has been known to do that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's weird with Vice because the television show I think is is very, very good and very well done in exploring what's going on in the world. But for some reason, their internet presence is
clickbait.
it's either just garbage about porn, or it's just really out there, kind of way into the left wing kind of stuff.
Well, they're different audiences,
Well, they have
right?
they have they have all these clickbaity like titles and stuff that like to piss off more conservative people. Like, what the hell are they doing now? You know, like that's what it seems like almost all.
Right. Yeah.
But
it's just to get a rise out of people.
But I definitely welcome the criticism, any of it.
Yeah, I think part of it too.
And we are all dudes, and we don't have as much female perspectives as we should have. So
Hey, if you ever need a vagina, I am here, guys.
I think too that there with us, that you pointed out and that I've kind of taken to heart, is that we kind of had that knee-jerk reaction where we were like, oh, we're not like this, guys. This isn't where we are.
But that's a lens to understand really what's going on right now with a lot of people. And people who aren't as introspective and stuff as us are like really knee-jerk, and then they just are dickheads about it.
Yeah.
I've come to really appreciate the cool-headed nature that you guys generally tackle topics. Even when I don't agree with y'all, I still really appreciate the perspective that y'all are coming from, because it's not my perspective, and I can learn from it, even if I disagree. But like I said, it was such a minor grievance. And after how many years you been doing this? If it's taken that many years?
It's been 6 years.
Yeah, 6 years. I finally have a show where I'm just kind of like, that didn't sit right with me. I mean, I think that's a pretty good record. But
well, let me ask you this.
That's good for this community we're in, yeah.
Yeah, let me ask you this.
I'm pretty strongly feminist. I'm pretty feminist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it is natural for us to have that knee-jerk reaction where we're just like, well, hey, guys, we're not like this. This isn't us. But do we really need to say that?
I mean, and I think, and I have this conversation with my dad. My dad and I get in political discussions all the time. Like, he's such a righteous dude, And I think for righteous dudes who aren't total dickheads, when they see the word, the phrase toxic masculinity, it's like immediately they're on guard, because they don't display toxic masculinity. So why they don't quite connect? But like, locker room talk, guys, you've been there, you've been a part of it. You may have just been privy to it, even if you weren't participating. That stuff happens, like all the time, everywhere. Like, my dad talks about it at the place where he works, and I mean, I've heard. Well, look, there's also like toxic femininity. It is a thing that exists.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So
I think I've just thought of this and I haven't really expressed it publicly. But I think some of the knee-jerk reaction that goes on to the critique of what's being called toxic masculinity and stuff, I think a lot of it has to do with when you're, well, we're all like gender studies here right now, but when you have to grow up in that toxic masculinity, it's like it's almost like this crap that you had to go through. And I feel like a lot of men get defensive because it's like almost like something, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it's like we're victims of it as well. And like, especially at its core of when it gets to violence and things, that it's like an attack. People feel like it's an attack on everything they've had to do to establish their identity, and it's weird, but I don't know if I really articulated it right, but it's like, I think a lot of the defensiveness comes from like the cost of your socialization as a male, and if you still have to deal with more traditional quote upbringing and things like that.
That's an amazing insight. I love that, because
does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I want to just say it back to you to make sure I understood what you were saying. But it sounds like you were saying that because even though you didn't accept toxic masculinity as part of your persona, you had to slog through all that, being bombarded with it, growing up, and I'm sure puberty is like the hardest part of that. But like, going through all that, you've kind of built your personality and your sensitivities on as an opposition to that. That's part of your identity as being in opposition to that kind of toxic masculinity. So when someone talks about toxic masculinity, it's kind of like that's built into your identity, even if it's as a contrary to that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and as a victim of it,
Mm.
I mean, my sister's a really big feminist, and so she's definitely schooled me on a lot of things. But, that's a big thing in feminism is that men are also victims
Yes.
of the patriarchal society.
As someone who's
So
made
much
things
so-
fun, like that really worries me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and so much so that this whole capitalist patriarchy it's literally slaughtered hundreds of millions of us in the name of these social constructs. I mean, it's like, like we're the cannon fodder. I mean, it's like so like we're the cannon fodder of toxic masculinity. We're born into it and ingrained in it, socialized into it. So it's almost like this it's this thing that everyone carries, and everyone's been a victim of also. So I think it's like, like you said, it's ingrained into your identity no matter how. So like any attack on identity as far as psychology is concerned, that's emotion for people. That's how all this
Objective.
politics and everything works.
Yeah.
So
Makes sense.
yeah, that's cool. No, we definitely need to hash out a lot of these ideas.
One of the things that gets me about when people talk about toxic masculinity, I have seen people say toxic parentheses white masculinity. And the only reason I would take any kind of umbrage with that is that they're singling out just white, when really all men of any race can suffer from this.
It's true.
I mean, the whole idea of masculinity is, if you take, just take Hispanic culture, not to beat up on them, but there is the whole idea of machismo, it can be pretty negative.
Well, I was actually going to say the idea of masculinity, while it is obviously tied to the male trait, which, isn't just a race thing, but different cultures do express masculinity in different ways and they have a different kind of relationship with the males, so like African American cultures have a different kind of toxic masculinity than white men have to deal with, than
Sure.
Hispanic men have to deal with. They all have their different kinds of toxic masculinity that they deal with. However, in our nation, white men are the ones who are mostly in power. So they're the ones who are most troubling right now. When we see all these kinds of horrific things happening, it's usually done by white men. We had that poor woman, Miss Tippett, who was murdered not too long ago. And immediately, all the pundits want to start dragging her corpse around, either to build a wall on top of.
Oh, Molly Tibbetts, yeah.
And,
Okay.
there's some reports that are saying that she was actually murdered because she said no to his advances while she was jogging. And then there's some other people who are trying to lay it squarely at the foot of him being a brown person, who's not really an American, even though his lawyer says he is actually a U.S. citizen lawfully. So all of that aside, just a week prior to that, we had a white man kill his wife and 2 kids.
Right.
And
the one in Colorado, yeah.
yeah, so men, look, domestic abuse and murders are tied together. People who are violent usually have an abuse history, a domestic abuse history. And if we want to start talking about toxic masculinity, I think we're going to really have to start looking at statistics and the way white men specifically in this country, I can't speak for other countries, but I can speak about this one. 1 in 4 women, or even at the most liberal statistics, 1 in 6 women are attempted to be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. That's too many. Gosh, every single one of my female friends Every single one, 100% of my female friends. And I don't know, maybe it's just a weird crowd that I hang out with, but 10 out of 10 of my friends have been attempted to be sexually assaulted or actually successfully raped. And that's too many. That's wild. That's wild. We got to stop and think about what are we doing to raise. And these aren't just strangers. Almost every single time, these are people that they know and trust.
Yeah.
So it's not just some wild random dude approaching you in the park while you're jogging and then pulls your hair back. It's not usually that. It's usually somebody you know and trust who's either a coworker or a family member or a loved one that you live with in your house. So, and that's something we really need to take care of. We can't just stop talking about it. And I kind of got on a soapbox here and kind of hijacked the conversation. I apologize. It's close to my heart.
Okay. That's okay.
Well, and that's the, so also like with what, we were talking about with that the incel murders and people like that, when that's publicized more than this striking reality that affects that many people, it's like you're right. The focus needs to be on what's really affecting everybody, and that's not being addressed or talked about.
And then you've got men who live their lives, who grow up and, they're told, if you're beat up by a woman or if you're harassed by a woman, you can't talk about it. You got to man up, grow a pair. All the insults that are geared towards men make them sound like women, and that's bad. Woman equals bad. So we're going to call you a pussy. We're going to tell you to grow a pair. We're going to call you a tranny. We're going to call you a little girl. All these things are made to make the male feel like a female, which equates with bad. And that's wild, y'all.
Yeah, emasculation.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm talking about, but how can we escape these? Because also this is a critique I have of the whole Marxist world in its current incarnation, is that there's a lot of deconstruction but no alternatives presented, no really effective ways of changing society and changing culture.
I mean, just raise boys.
That's where it has to happen.
We just got to raise boys to know better, that they can cry, to know.
But the thing is, boys have to deal with other boys.
I know. I'm so worried
that's
about
what.
that.
How? I mean, how do you?
I don't know.
And that's why I think a lot of people, carry all this, and when they feel like you're attacking their identity, when you really, start addressing this stuff, and they get defensive because it's all these burdens that they've had to do, all the social games that they have to play, and
right.
And it's not.
They've internalized it.
It's not as bad, I'll just say it's not as bad as what women have to deal with on the side of it that you discussed. Mm-hmm. But it's different, and it's violent also, and it has really strange sexual dynamics to it also.
And it most stunts men, and it makes them feel like they have to portray this kind of sexual machismo that they may not actually have. You're not a real man until you get laid, and if you're not laid, then you're a sad, sorry virgin nerd. And
but I mean, how is that? How do you replace this though? So it's like we can deconstruct all this, but how can you reconstruct something?
You can make laws and you can make rules from the top down, and I think y'all actually hit on this in an episode that I listened to recently, either 214 or 215, where you can make laws and that's fine, but change is not going to come from the top down. Cultural change has got to start from the bottom. And so we've got to start raising boys who understand the rules of the game they're going to be expected to play, but also
let's get into yeah.
You know what? You don't have to really be like that. You're going to be expected to be like that, but when you are a man, you don't have to perpetuate this culture. And I think it's getting easier. Hope.
Well, let's get into the flip side of that then, in that a lot of people from our community, the conspiracy research community, think that that there are socially engineered efforts whose goal is to deconstruct traditional masculinity in order for a new world order.
Yeah, they're
turning
the frogs gay.
Yeah,
that's what's going on.
and that's very prominent in the black community, conspiratorial and speculative, and certain religious sects. It's very popular right now that they think it's a concerted effort, in particular against black males, to feminize black males, as part of the general what they think is a genocidal organized mission against them. But it's a big thing right now, and all these people saying that, this is the cultural Marxists in the universities who are trying to engineer society so that people will be more easily controlled. And it's pretty well. That's the Alex Jones.
That's kind of what you come up against, though. That's
yeah,
what you
but
come
that's
up
the
against.
knee jerk
In an
reaction.
Alex Jones voice, to be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's what you're dealing with. So it's like, how do we, or how is this dialogue going to really take place? Because these people are just getting more and more entrenched.
Honestly, with stuff like that, and actually, I'd never heard that that conspiracy theory about feminizing black, African American males.
Oh, it's huge.
I'm not as up on conspiracy theories as you guys are, clearly. How to combat that? That's a good one. I don't know. I guess just dialogue. I'm a big believer. If we can just sit down together at, I'm getting a little religious here, but if we can just sit down together at a table of Christ, that's the real altar. If we can just sit down together at a table and break bread with each other, we can solve a lot of problems. And I think that,
that's all I believe in.
I think
it's got to be done at that level.
It's got to be.
It has to be.
Because
it has to be.
The law isn't written on stone anymore. It's written on our hearts.
Yeah.
And that means we have to connect our hearts with each other. And that's not going to help. That's not going to happen over a keyboard and ones and zeros on the internet. And it's not going to happen by the law being made up on high and then passed down to us. It's going to have to be one-on-one with each other. And, be the change you want to see in the world, that kind of stuff.
One of those examples that you're talking about, I'm not quite sure what we were talking about in 215 or whatever show it was, but I do remember we did talk about when the whole transgender bathroom stuff was going on. Mm-hmm. And my basic takeaway from all of that was that congratulations, we just put more rules and more laws for people to enforce. I mean, that's essentially what it came down to. So it has to really this kind of understanding has to start at a more personal level than having the government just legislate it into being.
The government's a leviathan, okay? And I'm not meaning that in a biblical sense. I mean, it's just huge. Asking a huge entity like that.
Little Thomas Hobbes there.
Asking a huge entity like that to turn on a dime and then pass legislation across all, it's just disaster. Let the people on the ground who have to deal with this crap day to day, let them handle it. Which kind of segues neatly into the Silent Sam thing, if you wanted to go ahead and get into that.
Well, before we do, I want to talk a little bit, because you mentioned toxic femininity.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't want to talk about just toxic masculinity. What's a definition of toxic femininity?
I don't think
because this is one thing, Heather, not to interrupt you, but the one thing that I get is it seems that there's a lot of people out there, and at least you're willing to admit that this exists. But there's a lot of people that will say, no, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I've actually never seen that phrase written in print or heard it said anywhere. This is something that, I guess, I'm sure I'm not the only person who said it. I'm not trying to say that, but I've never heard anybody else talk about it. So I've just kind of formed these ideas on my own. Toxic femininity to me would be, number one, internalized misogyny. But also deeper than that, it would be just women tearing each other down. The proverbial cattiness of women towards each other. There's been a movement in the last 10 years, trying to really push women to stop doing that, to stop tearing each other down, to help build their sisters up. And I'm sure this isn't new to the last decade, but I've seen a lot of push from women trying to lean into each other and build each other up rather than tear them down. Toxic femininity, I would say, would be also the negative sides of the proverbial straw man feminist, the feminist that isn't just content with equality or equity, but what they really want is to see men brawl low. And I don't know if that's in some sort of like knee-jerk reaction of, years of dealing with the crap that comes along with being a woman. No doubt there's a little bit of vengeance there. And for women who've been abused, I gotta say that's a little tempting, but it's not the way to get things done. I don't know. Like I said, I've never heard anybody speak the phrase, and I've never read it, but I believe that it exists.
This is all making me really think about a spiritual dimension to gender in the Jungian archetypes. And so you have positive, and Jung talked about this, and you have positive male archetypes that are not necessarily what you would call toxic masculinity. You have a warrior archetypes who are not toxic masculine either. You have old wise men. You have all these different positive male archetypes. I think he thought a lot of these problems with society had to do with which archetypes were dominant. And then on the female side, in the anima, you have I guess what would be like the over motherly, suffocating. You have the old hag archetype, this old witchy lady who's just like
negative archetypes.
So that would be to me like the toxic feminine side.
Oh man, I really got to say, if you don't read tarot, you really should. Like your understanding of if I may.
I don't read it. I got a nice old edition of the. Let me find it. What is it? It's just 1 minute.
I just wanted to say that kind of little part there from Serfiel is why I love having him on this show. Because I could never imagine. I could have never imagined that coming out of Luke's mouth.
Oh man, come on!
Jungian archetypes. Yeah, who's young?
I got my.
Oh, dude, I just want to go to Taco Bell, bro.
Let's talk about Neil Young. What?
But that's the thing. So, but if we're talking about, if you do think there's anything to Young, if people don't want to just throw out Young, then they're like, oh, we need to. If we need to deconstruct and destroy gender binary, it's like, well, is Young real? Are there these deep archetypes that are male and female, and there is a bifurcation there?
Yeah.
I mean, is that real? Does a lot of this mean that people are throwing out this idea? Because I think a lot of it is real.
Yeah.
Could be like Genesis Peorage and just become one.
Become one, yeah.
Become one soul or whatever.
I've got a pictorial key to the tarot by Waite.
Got a Waite, yeah. So.
And this is it's a 1959 edition.
I highly recommend, if you are ever interested in putting that pictorial key to use, you might actually really appreciate picking up the Centennial deck.
Okay.
They've got a borderless edition now too. That's almost like a poker card size, which is great for shuffling and just handling. But yeah,
I'm interested in the symbolism.
It's a beautifully remastered deck with the original illustrations by Pixie, and they're just gorgeous. But yeah, and that goes along with that book.
Cool, but I mean, so to get to the root of a lot of this, it's like I think that there is. It's on a spiritual level as well, and that doesn't mean necessarily woo-woo spirituality, but just whether the mind and the unconscious and superconsciousness and collective consciousness, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that all of this has to do with that realm. And the sicknesses in our society really come from that, and that the only key, because think about it, like all this patriarchy and all these negative things is based on old religious, cultural things that are ingrained from thousands of years, and to think that it can be replaced with just basically theoretical ideology and stuff, I think the key is in a lot deeper, older things.
Oh yeah, I mean, some days I look at society that we built and I said, we're just animals walking around in clothes. But uh, sometimes I feel like, maybe we are just all, social constructs. Some days I feel like I fall on the young side and sometimes I don't. But
Hmm.
but the tarot concept really struck to me because you've got these court cards, and all the tarot cards can either be read as positive or negative. Just that concept, not the opposite, is the negative of that card or the inverse of the card isn't necessarily opposite of that card, but rather the bad side of whatever that concept is. So you've got like the King of Cups, right? The King of Cups is supposed to be like this guy who's he's figured out his emotions. He's in touch with his emotions. He's got them under control. He is capable of feeling the depth of emotions, and have a handle on them and unite them with his will. Okay. And that's just a quick shorthand version of the King of Cups. But if he's inverted, is the negative side of that. It's not that it's just the reverse. He doesn't have emotions at all, but rather, he's overwhelmed with his emotions. He can be, passive aggressive. He can be, he can take too much on himself and not give himself room to breathe. He can drown in his emotions. So those kind of concepts of you've got these archetypes, the male, the masculine, and the feminine playing out in the deck, because of course this was, the classic tarot decks that we're familiar with right now, were all kind of written or drawn back in, medieval times. So there are these concepts of femininity and masculinity that don't always translate well now, but that's immediately what came to mind to me, because the opposite isn't necessarily true, but it's sometimes just being overwhelmed with the negative side of these things. So the negative
Right.
side of femininity is not that you're just the opposite of feminine, but that you, in an archetypal sense, perhaps become too consumed with reflecting back whatever you think other people want to see in you, or
Right.
being too overwhelmed with emotion, or
Right.
that sort of thing. I'm just rambling again. Sorry, I got on tarot.
No, it makes sense. It's deep shit.
Which, by the way, if anybody wants a tarot,
Cool,
ask.
cool. Yeah, definitely. We
Uh,
should do one on the air.
yeah, I'll do another. I've done a couple on the air actually. It's some different shows. Um, but
For the patrons, man.
Yeah. Well, let's get into Silent Sam,
oh, Sam.
because I mean you do have a unique perspective on this because you went to University of North Carolina, Chapel
Tar Heel
Hill.
born and Tar Heel bred, and when I die,
Yep.
I'm a Tar Heel dead. Rah
Is that
rah,
what they say?
rah rah, Carolina, Lina. Rah rah, Carolina, Lina. Rah rah, Carolina, Lina. Go to hell, Duke.
So I know that this has been a controversy for a while on that campus.
Like ever since it was
came-
erected.
This whole thing came up. When was that? A couple of years ago, when they're taking down all the statue. No, last year with the whole Charlottesville thing. So this
remember-
became a controversy then, and I don't think anything was done. So, but one question though: did the students tear it down, or did the university tear it down?
Okay,
I wasn't clear on that.
all right. So let's back up a bit. I went to school there. I graduated in 2003. I guess that tells you my age a little bit. I graduated there in 2003, and I remember when I was a freshman on campus, they were hitting up everybody for signatures to get that thing down. They've been trying to get that thing down since it was put up. So this is not new.
It was
But-
put up when?
Oh, I want to say 1918. I know they proposed it in like 1905 or 1908 or something like that. It was just at the turn of the century. And the Daughters of the Confederacy did this whole push. And the university didn't pay for it. They didn't want to pay for it. They didn't want to get involved. And so actually the
So
Daughters
one question
did
again.
their own
Wha-
funds, and they got them from the alumni.
So Silent Sam is supposed to be. He doesn't represent anybody. He's just kind of a
Actually,
generic.
he was actually based off of an actual soldier's visage, his actual face and everything. His
Okay.
actual man. I cannot remember his name, but he was a student at UNC, and he was supposed to. Silent Sam is supposed to represent all the students who came from UNC, who fought for the South, who lost their lives. And so it's supposed to be a memorial to the students of UNC who died in the war. And he's
Gotcha.
called Silent Sam because he has no ammunition. He has he has all his gear or whatever, but he has no ammunition. So that's why he's called. But of course, as every freshman knows, when they come in and they learn all the lore about all the landmarks there, the myth was that whenever a virgin would walk by, his gun would go off, and of course his gun never goes off. So there are no virgins walking past Silent Sam.
Oh, hardy.
Har. That's why it's called Silent Sam.
Is that toxically masculine?
I know. They're all whores. So, so yeah. But getting back to the issue, recently, in 2015, the North Carolina General Assembly made it illegal for any statues of anything to be removed or even to be moved without special permission from the Historic Committee.
Okay.
So now you couldn't have cities coming together and be like, yeah, we don't really want this anymore. We, the citizens of this city, do not want this statue anymore. Or we just don't even want it here in the middle of this town center. Maybe we can move it somewhere else. We can put it in a museum. We can do whatever. They weren't allowed to do that anymore. So 2015, General Assembly decided, yeah, no, putting the kibosh on that. You got to have special permission from this group of people that we've said you have to have permission from. So at that point, the university, of course, wasn't allowed to remove it, even though it's on university property. And the citizens of Chapel Hill couldn't remove it, even though they're the ones who pay the taxes. And the students couldn't remove it, even though they're the ones who pay to be there. So nobody could remove it, even though they tried and they tried and they tried. They kept trying to vote in people who would be on the council, the historical commission, so they could get the people in who would let them remove it. And it just kept seeming to never work out. So finally, I don't know what the impetus was for this, but was it 4 days ago that it was? How long ago was it? Maybe it was last week. It's sometime last.
It was last week. It was like last Monday, I think.
Yeah.
Or last Tuesday, actually. Yeah.
So they toppled the darn thing. Not sad to see it go, personally. I know, huge shocker. But so they removed it, and there were arrests. They arrested.
Okay, so who? Okay, so the students did remove it.
Students removed.
Okay.
The university actually put out an official letter saying. Actually, it was the Alumni Association put out an official letter, I believe it was, and they said pretty much like, we couldn't. The student body did what we were legally bound we couldn't do. So kudos to them, So what's going to happen to the statue now? There's a lot of debate about that, because there's a rule in that 2015 statute that says that if you do want to remove a statue, so that you can do construction without damaging it, or if it's in the way of something and you want to make sure it's preserved, it must be returned to its original location within, I think it's something like 20 days or something like that. And so a lot of people are saying, well, no, we by law, we have to put that thing back up in 20 days. But it wasn't removed for either of those reasons. So that law doesn't really apply. So there's some debate on how to interpret that law right now. Is it going to be put right back up? If it is, I'm sure it's not going to stay up long. Let's just be real. And if not, where does it go from here? I think it's best placed in a museum. If they do end up putting the darn thing back up, and we're not going to keep tearing it down every time, I feel like what might be best is a suggestion that I read online. I wish I could credit the person that I read it from, but I can't remember who wrote it. But perhaps the best way to have this replaced back where it was originally put up would be to, in fact, have secondary statues put all around it to give it some historical context, and just have some more statues or memorials put up around it, and have some plaques around it. You want history? Okay, let's give some people some history, because when that statue was erected, I forget his title, but a gentleman by the name of Carr did the speech for its erection. And he specifically stated that this was to honor the fine men who protected the Anglo-Saxon white heritage. He specifically said that. And he followed that up with an anecdote about how not just a few feet from where Silent Sam stood, he whipped, and this is going to be graphic, he whipped a black woman till her skirts were in shreds because she said something sassy to a white woman.
Yeah, the terminology he used was Negro wench.
Yeah, Negro wench.
Yeah.
How's that for historical context? Maybe we should put that entire speech up next to Silent Sam. I think when we talk about like, oh, we're destroying history, what are we going to do? Start tearing down statues to Christopher Columbus? Yeah, let's do that too. We don't need statues to remember.
Gonna get the Italians mad at you. The Sopranos are gonna be mad.
We don't need statues to remember history. We don't do history classes in front of statues. Okay, that's not where we do our learning.
Well, nobody cares about history anyway until the statues get torn down. So that's a whole other issue.
That's my rant. You got it. That's my rant. You asked.
So, to me, I've always viewed this at a distance because I don't have any family from the South, although I'm pretty much officially Southern now. I've been here since 1995. The South has thoroughly changed me.
Welcome to heaven, sir.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Get your mint julep.
But still, I view it at a distance. I feel like now there's also something I don't have as much distance from. There is statue debates going on in New Mexico with I think in Santa Fe there's a few statues that were erected of celebrating Spanish colonization, and when they were erected it was during the Chicano movement and is seen as a source of Chicano pride. And now but the tribes in New Mexico, Native Americans, are objecting to these along the same kind of grounds.
Yeah.
And it's creating a big wedge in some of the communities which are, very close. But that isn't as distant to me because I have family from both sides of that. And I don't know how I feel about that entirely. So what would you say how are we going to resolve this issue, and what do you say to the people saying that it's erasing history? And I think particularly when it's done by mobs, that's when it really bothers people though, and people get freaked out. Like this is when it's not done through,
because there is that vision there that we have kind of grown up, or at least I grew up with. When the Soviet Union fell, they toppled the statues of Lenin.
They chopped the crosses off,
and got that meant that the new order was now in charge. The old order was gone, and so that's kind of a symbol. When Iraq invaded, we invaded Iraq, and they did that whole little photo op where they toppled the statue of Saddam Hussein.
Regime change.
This is this idea, and there are people that get uncomfortable with that because that's how they view this whole idea that we are removing these Confederate statues, at least here in the South.
Oh yeah, I mean, next thing you know, they'll be throwing tea over a ship.
Well, and it's like this generation has passed, and we do understand that a lot of that revivalism of the Confederate battle flag, of these monuments, was relatively recent. They're not monuments from right after the Civil War, and it really was had racist.
No, they're not. Yeah.
But this generation has gone by now, and a lot of these people who are retelling a lot of history, and they're like, oh well, no, these are for the Confederate dead. This is just a monument for a battle that took place in America, that are combatants who are American who died, and for political ideas that have lived on, that are expressed today still. So,
well,
I don't know how to get. I have friends on both sides of this. I'm very who feel very strongly on both sides of this.
I can see it. I can see it that in the context of a battlefield.
Yeah.
Where that in people say, well, these belong in a museum. Well, that is a museum
or a cemetery,
essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, or something.
It's situated
something,
right there on the entrance to campus from Franklin Street, like the main drag right there, the business district. When you walk onto campus, it's almost the most common entrance into campus is right there next to Silent Sam.
And like you said, it was done for a reason at a time for a reason that did have very strong racial implications.
A lot of these statues were erected anywhere between 1890 until around probably 1920. That would probably be the time period that they were put in. So you have two things that are happening there. You have the South kind of winning the political struggle of Reconstruction, been able to put segregation into play, firm segregation, and then you also, in the 19-teens, you have this resurgence of white supremacy.
Yeah.
So you have this resurgence of the Klan, a lot of it due to the film Birth of a Nation in 1915. And right after that, you have this meeting at Stone Mountain where the Klan basically is refounded and becomes really strong into the 1920s. And so in this time period, that's when you see the statues going up. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely this symbol of white supremacy, but I think that it's okay when it's in the battlefields because they're in the right context.
Context. And honestly,
but
I don't even
when it's in a city, it's a little different.
It's in the city center, and
the people in the city should be able to decide if they want it or not.
Except for the North Carolina General Assembly, apparently decided that was not okay. That's my problem.
North Carolina is a weird place anyway.
All these Republicans who scream for, the rights of the people, tell the government get their hands off our rights. Where the heck are they through all this? Where were they when the 2015 law was passed? That no, you have to get. I in my city have to go up to Raleigh and get their special permission to say what's in our town square.
Yeah,
that's
cool. Yeah.
Not a peep out of Republicans. Not a.
Well, no, of course not. It was the same. It was the same thing with the bathroom bill, right? Because that was an imposition, and there was no small government. We need a small government. Well, we just used government to enforce it.
Yes.
So, yeah, they spout that off when
it's convenient.
It suits them. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. We should be running the nation. You and me and Serfiel and Rob too. If you want to
no way.
We should.
No way. I don't want any part in it.
Luke, if he's feeling up to it, but he would just defer to Rob. So.
I am conflicted about it. I'm just conflicted about the whole thing. I have an ancestor that fought in the Confederacy. Okay.
Sure, most of us do. Yeah, I do too.
And that was, and I went last year to the Manassas battlefield up in Virginia. There was this lady sitting up there doing some homework or something, and she starts talking to me about how people were saying, well, they want to take the statues out of the battlefield. And I told her, I said, yeah, no, I don't think that's right. The battlefield is where they belong.
Yeah.
You know, this is where the stuff happened. But people will always take things to an extreme.
Yeah.
We had something happen here at the Hermitage, close to where I live. There's somebody desecrated Andrew Jackson's grave, you know.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, I think that Serfiel is right.
Yeah.
When he says that, yeah, the people see this, they see it as a mob.
Yeah.
If it's a mob mentality, that's seen as a negative thing.
History is
But then again,
mobs.
what are they gonna do when they can't actually remove it? And then the school said, oh, well, we're glad it's gone because we wanted it removed too, but we couldn't because our hands are tied.
Yeah, they can't do a darn thing. Here's what I see probably happen. It's going to be moved somewhere. This is what happens in most cities in North Carolina, where I'm from. Where I'm from is a little town called
They're going to put it in your backyard.
Which
put it in your backyard, Heather.
Yeah, like in Oxford, which is the closest city to us. It's the county seat of Granville County. In Oxford, there used to be a statue to the Confederate dead in the smack dab in the middle of town, right there in like a roundabout kind of situation, in the main intersection right there in the business district. And they decided, you know what, we kind of don't feel like this is appropriate. Let's move this. So they moved it to in front of the library, which is a few blocks away. And I feel like the library is a perfect place for it. That's a place of learning where you learn about history. It's almost like a museum. I feel like, and by that context, perhaps Silent Sam should be somewhere on campus. But if you want to put them on campus, I say put some context around them. You know, post a plaque with Mr. Carr's speech on it. You know, so we have a context of what this. We don't need to enshrine these ideas. We need to learn about them. We need to know about them, but we don't need to give them special places of power.
I think that the current mythos of the Confederacy in the minds of a lot of people, though, is centered around the tragedy that it
the lost cause
that it couldn't be. Yeah, so I think it's especially sensitive because it's such tragic. The antebellum is like this Edenic image of them. It's this lost world that's over these. That these were individualist. It's there's a lot of feudal values, and that's where our honor culture comes from here. I mean, this is
chivalry.
It was a feudal society.
Yeah.
We always, and we always, though, have the tendency to look at history and say, well, everything was so much better back then. Mm-hmm. You look at what's going on now.
Oh, yeah.
Where people, the whole Make America Great Again thing, where they say, well, things were so much better back in the 80s, man. Life was so good, and but people have this distorted view of what life was like. Mm-hmm. And the further you go from a time period, the more people see, well, they have an even more distorted view.
Like all the people I know from the mid-century, like a lot of family members and stuff, they don't acknowledge how socialistic America was. Half of them went to school super cheap. They got crazy subsidized housing, that was going on, big programs that were real racist too, and led to how people are segregated even today. So much government, and then of course post-war, taxes were very high. And there's, people don't acknowledge that anymore. And they're like super right-wing people who want to like deconstruct things even more and take even more benefits away from people when they, a lot of these boomers and people even older had like a pretty good deal,
Mm-hmm. Right.
But there isn't the context, like you
for the
said.
rest of us.
Yeah. Heather, you ought to tell us the stories about the school that you went to.
I knew you were going to ask.
in North Carolina. Two stories that I could think of. One about the drums and one about the war.
Quit making the South look bad, Adam. Come on.
Just North Carolina.
So yeah, I was from the backwoods of North Carolina. Okay, my parents worked really hard because the schools in Granville County were crap. So they worked really hard, and they sent me to a private school in Raleigh, which is about an hour away from us. And it was Christian school. I feel a little uncomfortable stating the name of the school because I don't want any blowback from this, but they all
don't. You don't have to. You don't have to say what it was.
Delightful people, honestly. I truly believe in my heart of hearts that all those teachers there were there because they really believed in what they were doing. And they were teaching children that they loved. Some of them I feel were a little misguided philosophically and religiously. But regardless, when I was at the first incarnation of this school before it split off and became another school, I was at, it was high school, middle school, and we had a chapel service. We were going to have a speaker. We had one chapel service every week on a Monday. And but instead we were going to have a special whole week full of chapel services every day, in which we were going to discuss the evils of rock and roll music.
Yes.
This was taking up and none of us wanted to be there. Like, all the.
Did you talk about the influence of Aleister Crowley?
No, I didn't know that name at the time, but like.
Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, Mr. Crowley. But no, we didn't even know anything about that. But like, I, I'm looking around the chapel. I'm looking around the sanctuary there at all the students, and they're all like falling asleep. We're like making doodles on notepads. We're like passing notes back and forth. Nobody's paying attention to this crap. But the speaker was really into it. Okay, he was talking about the thing that stuck out to me that you referenced there was the drum. So he was to say that the origins of rock and roll music, which he's partly true, does come from African American traditions. But what he turned this into was super racist. He was saying that this evil rock and roll music was from the drum beats of Africa. The evil.
That's old. That's like the 50s stuff against rock and roll.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's an old line.
Oh,
wow.
yeah, it is. And I encountered it again later, but like that was the first I'd heard of it. Like as soon as he said that phrase, evil African drum beats, we are looking at each other snickering, like, can you believe this guy?
Well, the voodoo system does have very particular rhythms that do exist in rock and roll.
It's
and all the rhythms and the traditions actually meant things and had actual occult significance to them, so he might be right in some ways.
Maybe it's at 440 hertz.
So the other thing you referenced, the war. Hold on, let me get my mint julep and sit on the porch. Yeah, so I had this teacher. We'll call him Mr. W. I loved this guy. I mean, he was a hoot. And again, like, I really feel like he cared about the students. And, but he was really out there. Like, he cared about one subject and one subject only, the Civil War. And that is all he wanted to talk about. He took every chance he could in any subject he was teaching in history to turn it around and talk about the war and how it related to the war and how it affected the war. And, but he would never call it the Civil War. He would just call it the war.
He didn't call it the War of Northern Aggression?
Oh yeah, he would sometimes call it the full title. But he would
that's the full title.
And
Or Northern Aggression.
The War of Northern Aggression. And he called all the women were Miss Friend and all the men were Mr. whatever their last name was. And or he'd call us Good Christian. Good Christian, there's a piece of paper on the Christian floor. Could you please pick that up for the kingdom? Thank you.
Dang.
He was best, and like everything was about the war. And he would quote the Ken Burns film, the Ken Burns series over and over. And his daughter was in on it. Like, his daughter is all grown up now, but like when she was a kid, she would, he would tell stories about he goes, and my daughter came in after dinner last night and said, Daddy, can we watch the war? And I said, yes, we may. Just friend. Miss friend, are you paying attention?
That's great, man. That's
And I had a teacher in high school who kept a
the wall.
he on his desk he had a Bible and a copy of Rise and Fall of the Third Reich.
At least it wasn't Mein Kampf. I mean,
He asked us, and then he asked us I remember him asking us about the Illuminati, if we knew what the Illuminati was one day too. I remember that.
What did you respond? Did you respond to anything?
Oh yeah, I talked all about it. I think he's a pretty big Shriner and stuff, and he was working on me. He called me, told me to stay after class one day, and he was like, "Son, you know you're smarter than most of these scatterbrains, even the teachers." He said, "You know that guitar? You go down here in Nashville, it's all you'll see is people up and down the street playing that guitar. You're smarter than that." He's trying to get me to give up on music and join the Illuminati, I guess. So.
You could have had an end, man.
Yeah, you know.
Well, Heather, thank you so much. This has been really awesome.
I love talking
Thank
to
you for kind of filling it. Absolutely. Thank you for filling in the last moment. Tell everybody about your tarot stuff and where you can be contacted and your book binding.
Yeah, so we spoke about tarot earlier. I do professional tarot readings if anyone is interested. It's Shuffle and Cut Tarot at askshufflecut.wixsite.com/tarot, or you can check out Shuffle and Cut on Facebook or ask.shuffle.cut@gmail.com. And I'd be happy to do some reading for you. You can just ask me some questions about tarot itself.
Awesome. Well, close out the show for us, will you? With us.
Yeah.
And guys, we'll be back next week. I've got a very interesting guest coming on talking about a book, Bernie Taylor, talking about Before Orion. So I'm really excited about this, going through this book right now. It's going to be an interesting little, I think, where he's trying to kind of refute some of the arguments that's made by both the ancient aliens and by the Atlantis crowd school of thought. So I think it will be pretty cool. And hopefully Rob will be back with us next week. He won't be sick. He'll recover from his hangover. And Serfiel, tell everybody where they can find your Valley of the Tiki Beats. Turkey Beats. Turkey Beats.
First of all, we really need some support at patreon.com/Conspirinormal. We're trying to keep the lights on, when we got to improvise, and Studio B isn't as well equipped as Rob's underground bunker. So anything you can do helps. You can do one-time donations as well at Conspirinormal.com. You can check out my instrumental exotica hip-hop album, Valley of the Tiki Beats, at valleyofthetikibeats.com or any streaming platform or digital store. Limited edition cassettes are also available at newbanghiphop.bandcamp.com.
That's right, cassettes, everybody.
Oh, it's great though. It sounds awesome.
Remember those?
Hey, don't forget, if you don't want to do Patreon, people can also just leave a review, and that really helps out too.
Yeah, and in fact, Heather did our ever first review.
I sure enough did.
Yep, 5 years ago or whatever that was. All right, guys, join us next time on Conspirinormal. The Wall.